I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who'd fall for a man like Darren. But I guess that's how these stories always begin, with a warning you don't hear until it's too late. I was 42, freshly divorced after 17 quiet years with a man who slowly stopped seeing me as anything more than a roommate with health insurance. I had finally built a peaceful life in Athens, Georgia, managing a mid-sized marketing team at a boutique firm downtown and raising my daughter, Lacey, who had just gone off to college in Vermont. My friends, Mira, my therapist roommate from grad school, Caroline, my no-nonsense coworker, and Tessa, my ex-husband's cousin who stuck with me in the divorce, had all told me to wait, to breathe, to just be alone for a while. But then came Darren. Tall, lean, salt and pepper hair, a smile that walked the line between charming and cocky, and a way of looking at me like he saw something the rest of the world had missed. We met at an alumni networking event I was only at because my boss insisted I show face. He introduced himself as a real estate investor, casually name-dropping developments in Savannah and Decatur, though he said he was scaling back to spend more time in his hometown. We talked about art, about the collapse of empathy in modern relationships, about jazz and building roots in a world that kept pulling people apart. He said I was magnetic. I said he was intense. We started having dinner every weekend, then every other day. Within 2 months, he was practically living at my place. But the truth is, he never really moved in. He just stopped going home. What I didn't know at the time was that the place he wasn't going home to was a mortgage-strangled property out in Watkinsville, one he'd stopped paying on months before. He spun it like he was leaving behind the weight of his bachelor past and investing in us. What he was actually doing was setting me up to be his financial cushion. Things escalated when he proposed we buy a place together. I was hesitant, still smarting from the drawn-out financial wrangling of my divorce, but Darren knew how to wear people down gently. He'd pour a glass of Merlot, talk about how great we were together, how renting was a waste, how we could split everything 50-50. He even offered to put it in my name to make me feel safe. Eventually, we found a charming 3-bed colonial in 5 Points with a wraparound porch and a blooming magnolia tree that reminded me of summers at my grandmother's. He said he'd handle the paperwork. "Trust me," he whispered. And I did. I cashed out a chunk of my 401k for the down payment, signed every document Darren put in front of me, and paid the first 3 months of the mortgage while he moved his assets around. It was around this time he started changing. He began making snide comments about my wardrobe. "You're too old for that skirt, babe," and questioning how I parented Lacey from afar. He'd mock the work I did, calling my clients wannabe influencers and my job cute. Mira pulled me aside one night and said, "He's not lifting you up, Jess. He's anchoring you." I waved her off. I didn't want to believe I'd been that blind. But the moment of clarity hit during an argument about utilities. I noticed he hadn't paid the electric bill he swore he'd Venmo me for later. When I brought it up, he snapped. Not just annoyed, full-on yelling, veins bulging, fist clenched. He screamed about how ungrateful I was, how I didn't understand, how hard he worked, and ended with, "You'd be nothing without me in this house." That was when I knew. I didn't own the house. We did, technically, but I was the only one paying for it. And when I checked the mortgage paperwork I'd signed, I realized Darren had listed himself as a co-borrower with right of survivorship. Meaning if I died, the house was his. Meaning if I tried to sell it without him, I'd need his signature. I felt like I was going to be sick. I confronted him, quietly, like trying not to spook a predator. He gaslit me, of course, saying I'd misunderstood, that he'd done it for tax reasons. When I pressed further, "You flipped it again. So what? You're gonna leave me over paperwork?" That night, I cried in the bathtub until my fingers pruned. Then I called Tessa, who worked in a title office, and asked her to walk me through every legal way I might get out from under Darren. "It's messy," she said, "but not impossible." I started gathering evidence, screenshots of payments I'd made, texts where he admitted to not contributing, audio recordings of conversations we had about money. I documented everything, dated it, backed it up. At the same time, I stopped fighting. I played the game sweet, demure, apologetic. "You were right, Darren. I got too emotional. You're the rock in this relationship." I let him feel like he was winning. I let him think he'd broken me. But behind the scenes, I had a plan. Caroline introduced me to her brother, Theo, a real estate attorney who used to deal with asset recovery for couples who'd split properties after nasty breakups. We met in secret, usually at her house, with Mira running interference by saying I'd started seeing a new therapist. Theo helped me draft a quiet title action, which would dispute Darren's ownership claim based on financial contribution, or lack thereof. The process would take months, maybe a year, and I needed him to stay on the hook in the meantime. So I bought time. I started pretending I was worried about my health, just tired all the time, and Darren, predictably, started slipping up. He bragged about taking my credit card to handle a few things, and when I feigned interest in going into business with him, he handed over a half-assed proposal that essentially asked me to bankroll a house-flipping scheme. He was arrogant, sloppy. He thought he had me wrapped around his finger, but all I was doing was feeding the fire I'd soon light under him. And when it came time to strike, I'd make sure the house he thought he'd stolen from me would be the last thing he ever touched. I kept the charade going for another 6 months, wearing a smile as brittle as a dried leaf, playing the dutiful partner while inside I was a furnace of rage kept just cool enough by strategy and spite, and it wasn't easy. Darren was the kind of man who could sense weakness like a shark smells blood, and whenever I wasn't visibly impressed with his nonsense business plans or his smug networking dinners, he'd get defensive, accusatory, even cruel. But I kept my head down, documenting everything, and waiting for the moment when Theo said we'd built a case strong enough to move forward. And finally, that moment came. I'll never forget it. One overcast Wednesday in March, Theo met me at a little cafe on the edge of town and slid a folder across the table, his expression tight and serious. "Jess, we're ready," he said. "We can file the quiet title action and initiate a petition sale. If he contests, we have more than enough to argue undue enrichment." And I felt something shift inside me. Not I didn't realize I'd been clinching for almost a year beginning to loosen, but I still had one more piece to play before I dropped the curtain. I needed Darren to incriminate himself beyond the realm of civil court, and that came faster than I thought it would. 2 weeks later, Mira caught him in a lie. She'd seen Darren out with another woman, tall, redhead, maybe 30, laughing, holding hands, outside a fancy tapas bar on the other side of town. He didn't see her, but she saw everything. I confronted him, calmly, that evening, just as he was opening a bottle of wine I had paid for. "Who's Chloe?" I asked. He froze for half a second too long before launching into a story about an old college friend who was going through a divorce. I nodded along, recording the whole thing with my phone tucked between a stack of mail. The next day, I had Tessa pull up his credit card transactions. He'd been using my secondary card without my permission for everything. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, even a spa day in Atlanta that billed both their names on the receipt. I compiled the evidence, printed it all out, and gave Theo the green light. We filed. Darren was served at home by a woman he'd flirted with at our neighborhood cookout once, a process server who'd been warned ahead of time to expect manipulation. I wish I could have seen his face when he opened that envelope, but the best part was how he responded. He didn't contest. Instead, he tried to sell the house behind my back. Yup. He contacted a shady realtor friend, Gary something, who started quietly shopping it to private investors, claiming he was the sole owner. He even forged a signature on a listing agreement. Luckily, Theo had anticipated something like this. We'd placed a lease pendens on the property, a public notice of pending litigation, which scared off the first few buyers and flagged the transaction attempt to the county recorder's office. That got real estate fraud added to the stack of complaints we were building. I confronted Darren once more, this time not as a victim, but as someone holding all the cards. We met at a diner halfway between our house and his old place in Watkinsville. He showed up late, wearing sunglasses even though it was cloudy, and sat down like a man about to deliver a TED Talk. "Jess, we're destroying each other over nothing," he began, hands folded like some kind of guru. "I think we should just sell the house, split it, and move on." I let him talk. I let him dig. I asked a few innocent questions. When had he paid the mortgage last? Could he produce any receipts? Why was Chloe's name on hotel bills charged to my account? That's when the cracks started showing. He got angry again, called me vindictive, said I was twisting things to play the victim, and I just nodded, eyes calm, while recording the whole meltdown on a hidden lapel mic Theo had loaned me. The next morning, I forwarded the audio file and all supporting documents to our judge. Darren, predictably, didn't show for the preliminary hearing, so a default judgment was entered in my favor. His name was removed from the title pending a final ruling. The house was mine, but I wasn't done. I could have just evicted him, changed the locks, and left it there, but after what he put me through, I wanted something more permanent. With the title clear, I listed the house myself, staging it beautifully, replacing all his tacky furniture with rented minimalist pieces, and scheduling showings only during the hours I knew he'd be out meeting clients. The cherry on top? I hired a moving company, paid for by the money I'd reclaimed from the credit card company after filing a fraud report, to pack up Darren's belongings and ship them to the address listed on his old business license, a P.O. box in Savannah. I didn't even leave a note. Just an email with a single line: house sold. Don't come back. I closed on the property 6 weeks later to a young couple expecting twins. The profit margin was decent, not life-changing, but enough to start over. Darren, meanwhile, tried to file a countersuit for emotional distress, but it was thrown out immediately for lack of evidence. The fraud charges stuck, though. Turns out his little side business with Gary the realtor involved more than one forged document, and once the DA got involved, they uncovered a pattern. I watched the trial from the gallery with Mira and Tessa beside me, and when the guilty verdict came in, I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stood up, walked out, and got in my car, driving to the coast for a long weekend by myself. The first time in years I'd done anything purely for me. Now, months later, I'm living in a sunny apartment near downtown, spending weekends visiting Lacey or taking pottery classes with Caroline. The scars Darren left behind are still there, but they've hardened into armor. I used to wonder how I could have been so blind, but now I see it differently. I wasn't blind. I was trusting. And when that trust was shattered, I didn't break. I rebuilt. I won't ever let someone like Darren worm his way into my life again. And if he ever dares show his face in my city, well, let's just say I've got friends, receipts, and more than enough backbone to handle it. The strange thing about finally getting your revenge, real, tangible, legal revenge, is how quiet it feels, how it doesn't come with a thunderclap or applause or dramatic music swelling as you walk away in slow motion. It comes with silence, relief, and in my case, a crisp white envelope in my mailbox confirming the final transfer of funds from the sale of the house, addressed to me and me alone. I opened it on my tiny balcony overlooking the street, sipping chamomile tea with my bare feet up on the rail, the sun warm on my skin and the world, for once, feeling still. Darren never reached out after the verdict. Not when the house sold. Not when the fraud charges stuck. Not even when news broke in our local paper about this small-time real estate scheme that landed 2 men in court for falsifying signatures on property deals across 3 counties. He vanished like a smudge wiped off glass, and I was grateful. But not naive. Mira helped me install cameras on my new place, just in case. I also made sure to get a full financial cleanse, froze my credit, closed the old joint accounts, even changed banks entirely. It felt like shedding skin. One night, a few months after everything had been finalized, Caroline invited me to her lake house for a long weekend with the girls. Mira, Tessa, even Lacey flew down from Vermont for a surprise visit. Sitting around the fire pit, the 4 of us laughed until we cried, wine glasses in hand, passing around an old Bluetooth speaker playing soft 90s hits. It felt like healing. Lacey pulled me aside at one point and said, "You seem lighter, Mon. Like you finally exhaled." And I realized I had. For so long, I'd held myself in this clenched, survival-focused posture, through my divorce, through Darren, through rebuilding. But now, I could finally let go. It wasn't just about getting back at Darren anymore. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself I'd buried. The woman who danced in the kitchen, who painted for fun, who didn't second-guess her own instincts. I started dating again. Not seriously, just meeting people, taking my time, asking questions I'd been too afraid to ask before. The first man I met was a high school history teacher named Marcus who loved old documentaries and knew how to actually listen. He didn't rush anything, didn't talk over me, didn't make jokes at my expense. And while I didn't know where it would go, it was nice to feel like I had options that weren't tied to manipulation or obligation. But more than anything, I'd gained back my independence. Financially, emotionally, spiritually. I'd learned that no matter how cleverly someone spins a lie, the truth always has a weight, and if you're patient, it drags them down all on its own. Darren taught me that. He taught me what betrayal looks like when it's disguised as charm. But he also taught me how strong I could be when cornered. And now I own my own peace, bought and paid for. Not with a house, but with hard lessons, loyal friends, and the refusal to ever let anyone else write my story for me again.